Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to do part 2 on homeschooling in high school using the Charlotte Mason method. So if you didn't watch part 1, which is what I did yesterday, I strongly encourage you, when you have a second, to go back and listen to part 1. Part 1 was more of the kind of philosophy, more of the why, more of the reasons why homeschooling with the Charlotte Mason method in high school is effective, just some philosophical things to think about. So I would encourage you to go back and watch this one before you, listen to that one before you watch this one. There's a famous speaker, Simon Sinek, and he talks about how our why has to be bigger than our how. And so today we're going to talk more about the how, more of the nitty-gritty kind of practical applications to using this method in high school. But I just really think it's important to think through kind of why you're doing it at this age, why you're using these methods, how it might be different. So I'm just going to give everybody a second here to hop on. Hello. And then I'll continue talking about this here in a second, but just give everyone a minute to hop on here. As I was saying, yesterday's video was part 1, so today we're going to talk about part 2. And hold on, let me block this person. Okay, hold on. Okay, sorry, I had to go in there and block this person. So hopefully I did that correctly because I've never had to do that before. So anyway, I think I'm good now. So as I was saying, today I'm going to talk about some of the practical applications here. So let's jump in. I don't want to be long-winded like I was yesterday. So I apologize if I talked too much yesterday, but this is something I'm super passionate about. And so sometimes I can just talk about it. But so yesterday I was doing the kind of practical applications to wrap up. Yesterday I was doing more of the philosophical reasons for that. So I just wanted to kind of give a quick summary before we move forward. So I was just talking about how the Charlotte Mason method in high school is still extremely effective. I was talking about that we are preparing our kids for life, not just earning a living. And so that will affect the philosophy we use in our approach. I'm leaving for work. Bye, Abigail. I love you. Speaking of teenagers, there's my teenage daughter hopping in to say goodbye before she went to work. I love you, sweetie. We talked about what our goal is, that our goal is to create this person who loves knowledge, who's able to think deeply on a variety of subjects. And we talked about how the foundational methods don't change. So even in high school, you're staying true to the timetables. You still want those short lessons, so they build that habit of attention. Especially teenagers can have this amazing ability to dawdle, and things can just go on and on and on, right? So sticking to the timetables can really help them just pay attention and get so much more accomplished. That we're still using literary sources in high school. We still want those living books full of great ideas that will inspire and grow in their minds. That we're still using narration, that we don't want to stunt the growth of ideas by too many questions, too much lecturing, and that especially in high school, we're focusing on respecting the child as a person. And as they grow, it's just so neat to see them come into their own person with their own ideas and passions and thoughts, and really be able to draw that out of them and discuss that with them. And that's really, I think, one of the blessings about sticking with this method through high school. So today I just want to get into some of the practical applications of this. One of the things that comes up a lot when people think about high school, and again, one of the fears that we have is, am I preparing them for college? And like I talked about yesterday, good morning, Patricia, I'm glad you can make it, is that, we are preparing them for life, but we do want them to have the skills that they can be successful in whatever career path they take. And if that means going to college, we want them to have the skills needed for that as well. But I think because of that fear that we have, we can wonder, is the Charlotte Mason method going to work, or do I need to add a whole bunch more to it? And I think out of that fear and anxiety, it can be very tempting to pile more and more and more into what we're already doing. And in the quote that I read yesterday, I kind of talked about that we can kind of stunt that growth of those living ideas by adding all this other stuff to it and feeling like we need to push all that in, remember? And so I really think it's important that we just pray through it and say, are my motivations for adding this or that thing into what we're doing in high school that really doesn't fit with the Charlotte Mason method? Is that out of what my child needs? Am I seeing like a giftedness in them that I want to encourage? That's great. Or is it something that I'm doing out of fear or anxiety about not being able to do enough or measure up enough or not have them be successful enough? And so if it is something that's out of fear or anxiety, that's worth acknowledging, going, maybe I don't need to add this in right now, because that fear, like I said yesterday, that fear and anxiety does change the climate of our home. It does change the atmosphere, and it does change the relationship with our teen. They're not dumb, and they can pick up on that, right? And so, so I see a lot of people feel like they need to add a lot more traditional school type materials into what they're using in high school so that they can make sure they're checking off all the boxes, and I can make sure that my child's learning everything that they're supposed to know, and I can go through and check all their answers and kind of have this system that makes me feel safe and secure, and I know that I'm jumping through these hoops correctly. Whereas the Charlotte Mason method, it takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith in these principles. It takes a lot of faith that my child is able to do the work themselves. I'm respecting them as a person, and I'm putting them in touch with these living ideas. And I expect that mind to mind, they're going to be gaining the knowledge that they need. They're going to be taking from the feast what they're able. And, that can be scary, especially as they get older. And I want to make sure that I'm pouring this in, and then this is what's coming out. And it takes that kind of faith to kind of allow this process to happen. Good morning, Laura. I'm glad you could join us. And so anyway, I just want to caution you, if you feel like you have to add in a bunch of more traditional textbooky, workbooky stuff in high school, to just break through kind of your motivations and your reason for feeling like you need to do that. We don't want to stunt the growth that's already been there by using the Charlotte Mason methods. And so one of the things I often hear about is, what about literary analysis? Is my child going to be successful in a college level English class? Are they going to be able to read the books, analyze them, and write the papers like their professors would want them to? And so I just want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the fear behind literary analysis and what is included in what they are doing using this method. So first of all, there's two books that I use in a gentle feast. Oh my goodness, I didn't even introduce myself. Okay, let me do that. So if you're just hopping on, or somebody shared this with you, my name is Julie Ross. I'm the creator of A Gentle Feast, a Charlotte Mason curriculum for the entire family. And whether you use this or you use some other Charlotte Mason-y curriculum, or if you're just wondering, can I make this switch in high school? That's totally fine. I'm not going to talk specifics here. But there are two books that I use for literature. One is in middle school, and that is actually the book that Charlotte Mason used in her PNE programs for middle school. And it is H.E. Marshall's The English Literature for Boys and Girls. And what that book does is it takes you through history. And Miss Mason talked about the importance of integrating literature and history, especially as the students get older. And it takes you through the different time periods and shows you what kind of English authors and writers were doing throughout those time periods. So if your child reads that book in middle school, they are introduced to a tomb of English writers and thinking about what they wrote, why they wrote it. And we'll just have this amazing survey of literature from everything from Shakespeare up until Dickens. The book goes to the late 1800s. So, and all those authors and poets and thinkers in between. So that's a book for middle school. So they're getting a huge foundation of authors and thinking about why the authors wrote those books, what was happening in history at that time that kind of spurned that writing. And then when they get to high school, a book that I use, this was not part of Mason's programs. This is a newer book. But in high school, I used the book called Invitation to the Classics. And it's very similar to the book, the H.G. Marshall's book, that it goes through the historical time periods. This one I like a little bit better for high school because it does go into the different movements of literature. And it does talk about worldview. This is written by Christian authors, but even if that's not your belief system, you know, that this is a really great book just about authors in general, but it does go into some worldview questions as well, which I think is really important. Why did the authors write what they write? Hey, thank you, Joy. My daughter's friend is on here. She thinks I look cute. You're very sweet, Joy. So again, it's starting with Greek writers. So this is more, H.E. Marshall's book was English literature. So this is more world authors, which I think is important in high school too. So it starts with, you know, the Greek writers and it goes up into the modern day. So this covers more time periods than the H.E. Marshall book does as well. So this book is, I assign this to my high school students, but it's also a great book for you to read. So if you're like, I did not like English in school, I did not like English in college, I don't know about these great books and these great authors, I don't even know where to begin to talk to my kid about these books, this would be a great book for you to kind of pick up and read through on your own. Another way that you could use it is if you assigned your child a specific book to read and you want to be able to talk to them about it after they've narrated their readings. So for example, Belarus Travels. So that's a common book kids read in high school. So if your kid was reading this and you're like, I never read this book, I don't know anything about this book, I don't even have a clue on how to talk about this book with my child, you could read this. And so I really like that it talks about the author and kind of some of their background because, you know, the experiences that we have in life influence us as human beings, but especially as artists and the things that we're producing. So it's good to know some of the background of the author. It talks about the genre of literature. So Gulliver's Travels is a satire. And so it talks a little bit about, you know, what makes a satire. Talks about the story, gives you kind of a summary here. So again, if it's something you haven't read, this will kind of give you some foundational knowledge here. It talks about some of the themes in the book that would be good to talk about. And it does give a few questions. They don't actually call these questions. So this isn't like a workbook where you're given a passage and then you have to answer comprehension questions about it. These are, they call their questions in here, issues to explore. So these are great questions after your child's narrated to you, after your child's read the book. If you want to kind of have a discussion and kind of go a little deeper with them, not doing, you know, analysis or a bunch of extra stuff, but just having a discussion about it. So like one of the questions talks about Swift's worldview and how that impacts his writing and just kind of his moral statement that he's making throughout this book. And so it gets them to kind of think a little deeper. If they're still kind of giving you narrations that are basically like summaries, like first Gulliver went here and then Gulliver went here, and you want them at this age in high school to kind of dig deeper into what they're reading, these kind of questions will really help you with that. So I highly recommend this book for both you or and your child, or just you, to kind of give you some help with some of the books that they're reading in high school. So both of these, the H.E. Marshall's book that's read in middle school and then reading a book like this in high school is going to give your kid a huge foundation for English. Whether they go on to, oh, Jenny, good, I'm glad you like it. Whether they go on to college English or they just have to get that general ed requirement out of the way in college, they will know so many authors that most people have no clue who they are. and especially like poets and things like that, they will just have this reservoir. And one of the things I love about the Charlotte Mason method is these authors and these thinkers and these poets and these composers, they become like my kids' friends. The other day we were listening to Vivaldi's Summer as part of the summer morning time packet. And my kids, I put it on and my kids are like, oh, I know this. Isn't this Vivaldi? And I was like, yeah, that's who it is. But we learned him like 2 years ago. But they remember it because, you know, he's their friend and they've learned him. And, oh, yeah, he's my buddy Vivaldi. I know him. This is great. And so this just kind of puts your kids in touch with these really great minds and thinkers. And so they know these people. And so that will really help them later on. So this book really does dive into analysis of literature, like I was talking about with Belarus Travels, is talking about the genre and the theme and the characters and the motivations without doing a bunch of worksheets or a bunch of extra stuff. I think one of the beauties of the Charlotte Mason method is that you're able to cover so much. And people are like, how are your kids able to read that many books in a year? How are you able to cover that many subjects with only doing school for 4 or 4.5 hours every day? And it's because we're not adding a bunch of extra stuff. Okay. And so when you keep adding more and more things onto your child's plate, it's just going to wear them down, where they're actually being able to really get a really rich English education from reading these great books, and they're reading books about these great books, like this one or the H.E. Marshall's book. In high school, in the PNEU programs, Ms. Mason assigned a book by Matthew Arnold. It was a book of literary criticism. So they were reading the H.E. Marshall's book in middle school, and then this work on literary criticism. And it's in the public domain on archive.org if you want to look it up. I looked through it because I was like, ooh, do I want to include the one she did for high school? But it is very intense. And he uses a lot of French passages and stuff. And so it was just overwhelming. But and this one's more modern. So, but there is that one too that she originally used. But the point is that she did assign books for the kids to read that would help them as they're reading their literature books to kind of get these things. We don't have to do a bunch of, flashcards on what's theme, what's characterization, what's setting. They can learn that in an organic way by reading really great literature and reading these kind of books about really great literature is the point I'm trying to make. Some people also like to use the book How to Read a Book by Adler and Mortimer, I think. Teaching the Classics. I don't know what Teaching the Classics is, Patricia. She asked if she could put Teaching the Classics in the cell pile. I don't know. You can take a picture of it and I'll, if I know what it is, I'll let you know. But if I don't, you may have to research that. But a lot of people use the book How to Read a Book by Adler. That was written in like the 50s or 60s, I believe. And I think it's interesting that people assign that for their high schoolers to read, because that was a book that was assigned to me in my master's level theology course. So it is a hard read. So I like Invitation to the Classics a little bit better than that. And this is more a view of authors, where How to Read a Book is more diving deeper into reading a book. But that would be an option if you wanted to add that, if you felt like your child was capable. How to Read a Book by Adler, and then How to Read a Book Like a Literature Professor is another one. So those would be great reads for, I believe, for you as an adult, if you feel like you're, again, don't have that foundation to kind of go through these high school books. How to Read a Book Like a Literature Professor is kind of funny. He's kind of sarcastic. He kind of has some quibs in there that, I don't know. And some of the passages he uses, I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't use it as part of my curriculum for every family, because some people might get offended by some of the things. But overall, it's a really great book, and it's really great for adults to kind of go. Even if you just want to get better at reading your own books in your own free time, it has some great points in it. So that's the book, How to Read Like a Literature Professor. So I will link both those books, all these books that I'm talking about. I will try to link them all back in the comments when we're finished talking here. So hold on one second. So I wanted to read you a quote from, this is from volume 5 of Miss Mason's writings, Formation of Character, where she kind of talks about analyzing books. Now this is interesting because this book is a lot of stories. It's a lot of, you can see my orange, the sticker from my orange on the book. Okay, let me take that off. It has stories of different people, and it's kind of looking at their lives and what kind of decisions they made and what they, how their education impacted them as they were growing. And so this isn't kind of like her other books where it's very much education philosophy driven. But again, because education is a life and we're preparing our children for life, not earning a living, the formation of their character is a very big deal. But in this book, she says, and talking about kind of analyzing books, this malady of unbelief is common to the serious mind, educated to examine all things before they know the things they criticize, by the slow, sure process of assimilating ideas. If we would but receive it, we are not capable of examining that which we do not know. And knowledge is the result of a slow, involuntary process, impossible to a mind in the critical attitude. So here she's saying, knowledge comes sometimes through our slow, sure processing of ideas. But that if we go into something with a critical mind, that we're only reading this book, let's say, to analyze it. We're not just reading the book and letting the ideas come to us. That, she's saying that this is an involuntary process. It's impossible to a mind in the critical attitude. So that kind of critical attitude going into it will hamper the process of our mind assimilating these ideas. Let us who teach spend time in the endeavor to lay proper and abundant nutrients before the young, rather than in leading them to criticize and examine every morsel of knowledge that comes their way. Who could live if every mouthful of bodily food were held up on a fork for critical examination before it be eaten? So again, she always has these like feast metaphors here. So, imagine if before you ate everything, if you had to hold it on your fork and examine it. How many calories are going to be in this bite? What food group does this go in? What macronutrients am I getting from this bite of food? If you had to do that every time you took a bite to eat something, how hampering of a process that would be, but also just how annoying that would be, right? And so she's saying, we don't want them to criticize and examine every bit of knowledge that comes their way. We want to allow their bodies to assimilate and digest these ideas. And so that's why I think narration is so important. That's what allows them the time to kind of process what they've read, especially at the high school level where, quite honestly, these books are pretty challenging. And so they need to have time to kind of sit with those living ideas there before they move on to discussing it or kind of critiquing it. And sometimes that's a process, even as an adult, I'll read something and then a couple days later I'll hear something or I'll think of something and it'll take me back to what I had read a couple days ago and make it clearer, or I'll think deeper on it. Or I might have thought one thing the first time I read it, but now after a couple of days I was like, I think the author meant that. And so we need to allow our kids the time to kind of process it before we're like, okay, so tell me about what you read. Why do you think the character did that? What do you think the theme of this book is? What do you think about the setting of that chapter that you just read? And we're not allowing that time for those ideas to kind of grow and process in their mind first. And so that's kind of what she was saying in this chapter, that that can be a hamper, just like it would be a hamper to look at every piece of food before you ate it, right? But it doesn't mean that we don't do anything with the books that we're using, or we don't change how narration is done in the high school levels. And so I think that's a key too, that is important for people to realize, so that they're not like, oh, high school in Charlotte Mason Wayne High School is too easy. All they do is they read books and narrate. Well, yes, but there's more to it than that. So again, like I said, with the reading these kind of literature overview books that are helping them with the kind of critiquing of different stories. But there's also more that you can do with a book in high school. So in volume 3, which is school education, on page 180. So there's a whole chapter in here called How to Use School Books. And I really, 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 really recommend this chapter. So I'm going to link to it if you have time and just want to kind of read through it, because since books are so foundational to the Charlotte Mason method, reading through this chapter is just so key. But in this chapter, it's talking about, using living books. It's talking about using a careful single reading to build that habit of attention. And then there's a part in here called Other Ways of Using Books. And so this is key here to kind of think through. But this is only one way to use books. So before she was talking about reading and narrating. Others are to enumerate the statements in a given paragraph or chapter, to analyze a chapter, to divide it into paragraphs under proper heading, which to me is like outlining, to tabulate and classify series, to trace cause to consequence and consequence to cause, to discern character and perceive how character and circumstance interact, to get lessons of life and conduct, or the living knowledge which makes for science out of books. All this is possible for schoolboys and girls, and until they have begun to use books for themselves in such ways, they can hardly be said to have begun their education. So that's a very strong statement, right? So that there are other ways to use books. Now, again, this isn't something that has to be done every day, has to be done with every book, right? But it is important that they are able to do that. So enumerate, let's just go through these ways here. So the first one was enumerate the statements. So taking the statement of a book and using it, rewriting it in their own words, which is kind of what we're used to with the narration, right? Or even expand on the words that the author said. Then there can analyze a chapter. And so that's where, talking about some of these ideas and concepts would come in. They can divide it into paragraphs. So kind of teaching them, and this goes really well with like science books, how to kind of outline a chapter with headings, to trace cause to consequence and consequence to cause. So learning cause and effect is what we would kind of call that today. And again, that doesn't mean they have to have a worksheet that they're going to fill out about what the cause was, what the effect was, circle the cause, underline the effect. I mean, we all have to do those worksheets in school. Do you remember those? But it's something they can think through and kind of talk through the story. A fun thing to do would be even to kind of make like a mind map where you're kind of drawing pictures of and writing out, well, this happened and that caused this, and this happened and this caused this, and this happened and this caused this in a story. Like a really great book for that would be like Pride and Prejudice, right? Like Mr. Darcy did this, Elizabeth thought this. Then, Mr. Darcy did this, and then Elizabeth did this, and then Elizabeth did this, and Mr. Darcy thought this. And, it's a great cause and effect kind of way to map through that. And then to get lessons of life and conduct, like that they're going to take those books and they're going to realize, oh, well, that person acted like that. And this is what happened to them. That was the consequence, right? And it's that formation of character, the preparing a child for a life that we were talking about. But that's not necessarily something we have to drive in. Did you catch how he acted in that book? We don't want to act like that, do we? Right? She talks about over moralizing everything, that we want them to kind of gain those little tidbits for themselves there. Yeah, I think that was all of them. But then she does give a caution. So right after she says there are some other ways to use books, the very next heading is this kind of caution here. But let us be careful that our disciplinary devices and our mechanical devices to secure and tabulate the substance of knowledge do not come between the child and that which is the soul of the book, the living thought it contains. So, we don't want to use books in these other ways so much or in such a way that it, like I said, kills that living idea. And this is what I think is so key here. She's talking about we're coming between the child and the soul of the book. When you think about, and she goes on to quote Milton here, that books aren't dead things, right? Like this is, they're living ideas inside of this, especially, like the Word of God is living and active. And so, especially that one, but like, other books contain living ideas that are going to teach and grow inside of our child. And we don't want to come between our child's mind and the soul of what is in this by adding too many extra things. And so even in high school, that's a caution. And again, there's no clear cut, like, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. You know, it's a fine line. And I think that's why she talks so much about the role of the Holy Spirit in educating our children, that we just have to kind of be walking with the Spirit to know, am I adding too much? Am I not doing enough? Am I adding, you know, and prayerfully walk through that. And in this Milton quote, he has some very strong words about books. And he says, as good almost kills a man as kill a good book. Who kills a man kills a good, reasonable creature, God's image. But he who destroys a good book kills reason itself, kills the image of God, as it were, in the eye. So, oh, yes, page numbers, sorry. Okay, so this is volume 3, page 180 and 181. I'm reading from here. But he says, but he who destroys a good book kills reason itself, kills the image of God, as it were, in the eye. I mean, that is some powerful statements. I like want to cut that out and like send it to some of my high school English teachers, because they really killed some good books, in my opinion. I probably would really like some of the books I had to read in high school English if I hadn't had to analyze them to death. There's a reason why those books are classics, right? But when I read most of them, I was like, I hate this book. Then she also talks in this same 2 pages here about the teacher's part. The teacher's part, in the first place, is to see what is to be done, to look over the work of the day in advance and see what mental discipline, as well as what vital knowledge, this and that lesson afford, and then to set such questions and tasks as shall give full scope to his pupil's mental activity. Let marginal notes be made freely, as neatly and beautifully as may be, for books should be handled with reverence. Let numbers, letters, and underlining be used to help the eye and to save the needless flag of writing abstracts. Let the pupil for himself half a dozen questions which cover the passage. He need not write the answers, if he be taught that the mind can know nothing but what it can produce in the form of an answer to a question put to the mind by itself. So she talks about underlining and highlighting. See, I'm following her advice. I write all over my books, even these beautiful ones. But she's saying, okay, so here's the teacher's part. And I think this is really key and something that can be easy to not kind of notice is that we as the teacher do have a vital part in preparing this feast and putting our child in touch with these living minds. So she says here, the teacher is going to look over what work needs to be done. And so I know you all do that, right? Like you look maybe at the beginning of your week, or maybe you do it every night or every morning, kind of here's where we're going, here's what they're going to be reading. But also I think it's important to kind of take those assignments. So let's say your child has to read 4 chapters in Gulliver's Travels this week, right? It would be very beneficial to like read that passage in Invitation to the Classics I was talking about on Gulliver's Travels. If you have time, it would probably be beneficial for you to skim through or even read those chapters that they're going to be looking at. And it says about setting questions and talking about the vital ideas. So she's saying, you know, as teachers, we can make notes, we can highlight in the books, things that we might want to discuss or draw out with our kids. But again, we're not coming, it's not like we have to come up with all these questions to make sure that our child got everything they need to know about this chapter, right? That's their job. Their job is to take what they need to get the knowledge that they need from this great mind. And but we can discuss it with them after they narrate. So that's the kind of questions she's talking about here. But she says more important than the questions that we have are the questions that they have. So they should come up with half a dozen questions about the passage. They don't need to write the answers because the mind is already answering the questions that they're asking, right? So, you know, a great skill to kind of encourage is say, okay, what questions do you have after reading this? So not just a narration, but it could be questions that, you know, they might ask somebody else, but also be questions they have, like, why did she do that? Or what did the author mean when they said that? Or I'm not really sure what that word meant. Those kind of questions to get them to think a little bit deeper. Again, we're not adding a bunch of stuff onto what we're already doing, but we're going to take those methods and principles that we've used throughout in high school. We're just going to like go a little bit deeper here. Okay. And it can be tempting to think, oh my goodness, I can't do this. I don't know how to teach my kid English. I don't know anything about any of this. I should just have somebody else teach it or take class somewhere or something. And I would just like to say that that fear isn't necessarily true. Again, we are preparing the feast. We're putting them in touch with these great minds. We're giving them some deeper ways to do that and some more tools in high school. But you're not responsible for being the only one that's teaching your kid all there is to know about English. They are gaining that knowledge for themselves. The only true education is self-education, like Miss Mason says. So they're doing that themselves, but you're kind of walking alongside them and doing that. Another great resource, if you don't have time, to read through your kids' books. I showed you all the stack of books my high school kid's going to read next year. And so if I hadn't already read all those, there's no way I would be able to read them this summer. That's just like, I don't even know, 25 books there. But even if you can only read just one, it would just be such a benefit to you and your child. So just pick one book that they have to read for term one. You could pick the book that you know the least about, or the book that looks the most interesting, or a book that like you would actually enjoy, you think, reading. Like if your kid has to read Jane Eyre, that's my favorite book of all time. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So just pick one and read through it. And then if you get to, as the year goes on, if you have more time, you can read for term 2 and then term 3. But just even having one book that you can kind of hear their narrations, ask them good questions, go a little deeper, it's just going to be a huge blessing for both of you. And you're going to be teaching them those tools through your discussion that they can use in other books. But a great resource too, if you don't have time to read it, the books that they're using is Spark Notes. So, kids have so many amazing tools. Can we just say that? Like if Spark Notes would have been around when I was doing high school English, well, I probably wouldn't have read any of the books that I was assigned. I probably would have just used Spark Notes. But in Google, gosh, the kids these days, things are so much easier. But Spark Notes is great. On Spark Notes, you can type in like the name of the book. So I'm just going to use Gulliver's Travels because I'm using that one today. So type in Gulliver's Travels. It will give you a chapter by chapter summary. So if your kid has to read chapters 4 through 8 this week, you can go in Spark Notes and you can read the summaries for chapters 4 through 8 just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on in the story. Spark Notes gives you characters. So if your child is talking to you about somebody in the story and you're like, I have no idea who this person is or who this character is or what they're even talking about, you can go on there and see, oh yeah, that's the character, that's the father of so-and-so. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. There's also some great discussion questions on Spark Notes, some essay ideas and things like that. So that's just a great tool. It's free. If you kind of want some more information on how to approach a book that they're reading that you haven't read. Because I get that question a lot. Like, do I have to read every book that my high schooler is going to read? No. Would it be beneficial if you're able to read some of them? Yes, I think for any age, if you're able to read through some of their books and just have a deeper understanding of what they're reading and be able to talk about it and talk about their narrations with them, that's great. That's a huge blessing. But don't feel like all this pressure to kind of have to read through 25 books this summer. They're doing this work of the self-education themselves. So in narration in high school, your child's going to be doing more written narrations. They're still going to be doing oral though. So that's not something that goes away. Even in high school, they're still doing oral. So the way I do it is when my little ones are doing room time. So after lunch, they have an hour in their rooms, or one child goes into my room because they share a room. And during that hour, that's when I meet with my high schoolers. What have you been doing today? Give me your narration of whatever. If for some reason I'm not able to do that, like let's say we have a doctor's appointment in the afternoon or something like that, and I have to leave, my high schoolers will voice message me their oral narrations. So if they they have phones, and but you could use an old iPod or something if you don't want to do that, or even, I mean, I think they still sell those like little old tape recorder message things that we used to have in the 80s, and they could voice record their narration on one of those old tape player voice message things as well. But so my kids are still doing oral narration, and then I'll tell them what subjects I want a written narration for. If you do use a gentle feast, I kind of, in the Form 4 high school planner now, the new planners, there is a list of kind of what written narrations to ask for in a week. Kind of like a little checklist here of what they would need to have. So let me just show you that. So for the week, I want one written narration in each of these subjects. And by listing them, that kind of helps me like, and them know which ones to do. So one history, one literature, one geography, and then the other narrations would just be oral. And then for their science, I want a narration of the readings that they did, and then a narration of the lab that they did. And then one of the other things to do in high school, literature and composition are so tied together in these English courses. And so you're taking these kind of deeper narrations, and you're taking these deeper thoughts that they're having about books, and you want that to translate into their written narrations about the literature books. And so a way that I do that is I assign different kind of composition prompts that tie in with their literature. And this is a part of the Form 4 packet in a gentle feast, but you could make, you could do these yourselves depending on what they're reading. And I don't do this every week. It's not always tied to literature every week, but I think literature and composition, obviously, in English classes, they tie together very well. So for example, this is from the White Year. So I give them a video to watch on finding textual evidence. So again, this is a skill that they're going to need to have if you're going on to college, is finding evidence to support your theories, right, in what you're reading. And so there's a video to watch on that. So I'm kind of just giving them in a very easy, quick way, here's the skill. And if your kids are well read and they've been reading living books this whole time, it's not a hard skill to grasp, right? They kind of have been doing that in their own minds for a long time. And then it says, write an essay describing the changes that take place in Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's relationship throughout Pride and Prejudice. Use textual evidence to support your theories. So again, it's a very common kind of literary analysis prompt, but giving them the space to write that in here kind of helps me. I don't have to like reinvent the wheel every day of what they have to do and what they have to write about. But it is teaching them those kind of literary analysis skills without having it to be forced into their mouths. Again, it's them preparing the feast and gently bringing them to it. So they are learning those skills in a way that's not going to stunt those living ideas. So this is like, after they've read most of the book here, now we're going to kind of do some deeper thinking about it. If you are assigning your kids written narrations yourself at the high school level, you can assign different kinds of narration. So it's not always, tell me what happened in that chapter. Okay, that's a very basic narration that you would expect from like a Form 1 or a Form 2 child. So as they're progressing, you can ask them various narration questions. And if you look at the appendix of School Education Volume 3, at the exam questions that she gives to the high schoolers, remember, exams are extended narrations. You can see the kind of depth of these questions she's asking and how various they are. So instead of what just happened in this chapter, you can say explain. So that's a word that she used a lot. So explain how George Washington was able to outmaneuver the British at the Battle of Trenton. Okay, it's not just what happened in that chapter, but explain something to me. That goes really well with science books as well. Like, explain to me the process of rocks turning into soil, or whatever the chapter was about, right? Describe. So you could tell them to describe the moors in Jane Eyre. Okay, describe the character of Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, so it's not just focusing on, here's a summary of all the events, but we're asking them these deeper narration prompts to develop their thinking more. And then the last kind, so there's the narration, that's just a narrative, a series of events. There's explaining, expository writing, and oral telling. There's descriptions, and there's also persuasive. So, and this can be oral or it can be written, right? These are like 4 main kinds of writing that, we would teach kids. And so you are teaching them these kind of different genres of writing through oral narration, which is where she said to always start, and then through some of their written narrations and composition assignments in high school. But a persuasive would be, let me think of something. Okay, so my daughter's doing like World War II next year. So it could be, after reading that chapter, do you think it was a good decision for the United States to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And so then they would have to they're writing their opinions. So in high school, we're diving deeper here, this persuasive, this kind of deeper thinking here. Patricia asked, so that's in the planner. Now that's actually in the form for student packet. So the student packet has a space now for them to write off their composition, check off what composition assignments they did. And it has these composition lessons in it now as well. All right, so does anyone have any questions about anything I've talked through so far? I know I've talked a lot about narration and analysis and kind of how we can teach them these skills on a very natural level that fits in with the living books that we're using without adding a whole bunch more onto it. All right, well, if no one has a question, I'm just going to talk about one more point here, and then I'll wrap up. And if you have questions later, again, you can always leave those in the comments and I'll get back to them. So a question I often hear asked too is, what if my child's narrations aren't living up to my expectations? So in high school, we want to really see that they're able to, articulate their thoughts clearly, whether it's orally or through writing. What if they're just kind of skimming the surface here in their narration still? What if they're still just giving me like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened at the end, right? So a couple of thoughts to think through here if your child's narrations aren't meeting up to your expectations. It could be for a variety of reasons. One, it could be that your child is just skimming the chapters, that they're not reading them as deeply as they should be. So if their narrations are kind of at this very shallow level, it could show that they're just kind of skimming along with what they're reading. And so if that's the case, I would recommend, if you're wondering if that's the case, I would recommend kind of reading the next couple chapters yourself that they're going to be reading. And then when they come back with their oral or written narration, if it's still up here at this level, then you can ask them some questions now because you've read it and you can kind of go, oh, so what did you think about when that happened? Or why did you think so-and-so did that? And if they're like, I don't know, right? It might be that they're just kind of skimming the chapters. And so that would be a character issue, right? Are we doing our assignments with excellence? That could be a habit issue. Are we able to attend to the amount of reading that we have to do? And that you want to work on the habit of attention there. And so those are 2 really big issues, character and habit training. And so if you see either one of those, even in your high school, you're going to have to take a step back and go, okay, we need to work on these. We need to work on this habit of attention, or we need to work on this character issue where you just want to fly through everything and not do your work. And so their narrations can be very telling for either of these, but it could also mean that your child just needs some help, right? It might mean that they are actually reading it and trying to pay attention and trying to understand it, and that the level of the text at the high school level might be really challenging. And so if their narrations aren't really meeting up to your expectations, maybe you want to assign less of a chapter Again, like you would do with a younger child, just assign them a page or two. Then come give me your narration and kind of work on building up that skill of narration. It might be that you've never varied the kind of narration assignments or what you're asking them to do. So if all they've ever had to do is give you a summary of the chapter, well, of course, they're going to keep giving you a summary of the chapter, right? So that would be a conversation of, okay, now as we read these books, I'm going to give you, I showed you in the planner, like let's say for history, I want this week your history written narration. Okay, rather than just telling me what happened, I want you to focus on, and I can even write this here in their planner. I might write, okay, today I want you to focus on the decision to drop the atomic bomb. What were some of the pros and what were some of the cons and what was some of the reasoning behind that decision? I can put that there. That would be the persuasive kind of written narration that I want them to write. Or I could put by their literature written narration. I want you to focus on describing a character to me today. Okay, so you can kind of vary how you're asking them for these narrations, and that might help. You might have to walk it through with them a couple times, but just like the other narration, you're just kind of building that skill slowly. I had a friend, hold on one second. So this is the book that I use in a gentle piece for high school American history, right? And she was telling me, like, she handed this to her son at the beginning of the year, and he was like, "You've got to be kidding me. This is my history book? Like, Mom, do you see how big this thing is?" Of course, this is used over 4 years in a gentle feast, and you'll see, in Charlotte Mason's program, she would assign a book over multiple years and kind of breaking it up into digestible chunks. But, and I usually only assign, 4 to 6 pages a day. That's it. So that they can take those. There's a lot of material here, a lot of people, a lot of dates, a lot of places, and be able to kind of think through it. But if my child was struggling, and my friend that I was talking about, at first her son was struggling with his narrations of this book, she would just assign him 2 pages. Just read these 2 pages and then come narrate to me about them. And so that's a strategy you can use as well. Another thing that might hamper your child's narrations at this level, if they're not giving you the depth that you would want, is that you're mixing narrations and worksheets. And this is challenging because, okay, so if you're giving them a bunch of worksheets to fill in about a history topic or a bunch of worksheets about literature, for example, and then you're asking them to read this book and come narrate to you orally or written. Okay, which of these is harder for your brain? To fill in a worksheet or to actually have to digest all this material and be able to retell it in your own words and make it your own? Well, narration is. Narration is much higher level thinking. And, Miss Mason talks about how it's making these permanent imprints on your brain. And so that narration process is much more challenging. If they're used to or they're also at the same time doing a bunch of worksheets, this is lower level recall kind of thinking. And so this is easier, and our brains naturally tend to move to what's easier. And so this narration process will seem so much harder when they're constantly doing these easier mental processes. And so they might just narrate real super fast. It's like, oh yeah, my mom wants me to write this stuff down too. And then I'm going to go back to this other stuff that's easy and isn't as complicated as of a mental process. And so, especially with literature, I think, if you want their narrations to be really deep and to start to focus on some of these literary criticism ideas, that mixing a bunch of literary analysis worksheets with that can kind of hamper that process as well. And so that's just something to think through as you're looking at their narrations. So if they're not up to your level, it can mean a variety of things. It might mean that you need to scaffold a little bit better to kind of give them the tools they need. It might mean you need to kind of pare down the reading assignments at first to kind of help build that skill of narration. It might mean that you have a character or a habit training issue to kind of work through. Or it might mean that you can't add other too much other things into what you're expecting them to narrate as well. And if you have a child who is jumping into the Charlotte Mason method in high school, I get that asked a lot too. Can you do that? Yes, 100%. Yes. It doesn't mean that since they haven't been narrating since they were 6, they're not going to be able to narrate in high school. You just have to start smaller. Start with oral narration, start with a few pages, start with 1 or 2 subjects, and then gradually add on more as they're able. But I've definitely found that high schoolers are able to pick that up much faster than, like, you know, my 6-year-old, I think it took her a year and a half to be able to narrate well. So we had to work on that skill for a long time. And then people I've talked to who start later in high school, you know, within 2 or 3 months, like the friend I was talking to you about with the Paul Johnson's book, within 2 or 3 months, her son was able to read the 5 or 6 pages and give her an excellent narration and have excellent discussions with her about the meaning and some of the deeper things that he was connecting to from reading this. So it happens quicker, I think, at the high school level with older children who are new to this process. You have to start slower, but they'll be able to move much faster. And in closing, I just wanted to end with a quote from School Education here. So this is Volume 3, School Education, page 162. Well, at the bottom of page 161. He must have a living relationship with the present, its historic movement, its science, literature, art, social needs, aspirations. In fact, he must have a wide outlook, intimate relations all around. In force, virtue must pass out of him, whether of hand, will, or sympathy, whatever he touches. This is no impossible program. Indeed, it can be pretty well filled in by the time an intelligent boy or girl has reached 13 or 14, for it depends not upon how much is learned, but on how things are learned. And she talks about this wide and generous curriculum. Let them get at the books themselves. Do not let them be flooded with a warm dilute at the lips of their teacher. The teacher's business is to indicate, stimulate, direct, and constrain to the acquirement of knowledge, but by no means to be the fountainhead and source of all knowledge in his or her own person. The less parents and teachers talk in and expound their rations of knowledge and thought to the children they are educating, the better for the child. Peptonized, I think that's how you say that word, peptonized food for a healthy stomach does not tend to a vigorous digestion. Children must be allowed to ruminate, must be left alone with their own thoughts. They will ask for help if they want it. So again, I think all along, you know, our role as a teacher has been to create this wide and generous feast, to gently lead our child to it, to provide the resources that they need at the different levels. To provide that kind of scaffolding is a word that's commonly used, right? To kind of get them to think a little deeper, to grow a little bit and more in their knowledge, to use the tools that are before them, to come in touch with those living ideas. And our job is to trust the process, to not talk too much, and to be there for our child when they want our help. And especially in the teenage years, I mean, we can push, we can pull, we can nag, we can bribe, we can yell. I've done all of that. It doesn't go well. You know, at that age, our relationship with the child, the way that I've seen that grow with my own teenagers, is to be that that gentle guide, that person who's preparing the feast. And that's a very important job, and that's a very difficult job. All you Charlotte Mason moms, you know, right? Getting these books, figuring out how to use them, coming up with schedules. That's a very hard job, and it's a very important job. But that's our job, and we need to not encroach on their job of their own self-education, especially as they grow up to be teenagers, to show them the respect that they deserve, to show them that we value what they have to say, we value their thoughts and opinions. And really, I just want to encourage you, you will be amazed at how well-spoken and articulate teenagers can be using this method. From being so well-read, from being able to make thoughts their own through speaking them in oral narration or writing them down in written narration, being exposed to art and poetry and music, just how deep their thinking is. Sometimes I'm just blown away by the things my kids are telling me. I'm like, I did not think those deep thoughts when I was 16. I was like, okay, what's on sale at the mall and what new videos on MTV this week? Like, those are my deep thoughts at 16, right? So I'm just blown away by the connections that they can make at this level, by just adding on all these things throughout the years. So it is possible. It's not as daunting as it seems. And if you have questions, I'm here for you. I want to help you. Please just let me know any more specific questions you may have that I didn't address, and I will happily answer those as well. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. I just realized I've been talking for an hour again. I am so sorry. I really need to get better at like talking less. See, Charlotte Mason can teach me too. I talk too much, but it's just because I love this stuff so much, and I just want to give you all the tools that you need that I continue to rant on. So anyway, I hope you all have a great day, and again, let me know if you have any more questions. Talk to you later.